In the previous podcast, Mr. Richards was sent up to land on Mars by the British Department of Space in an attempt to outrace the Chinese. Mid-flight, Mr. Richards encountered the most unexpected appearance of Alfonso Eldorado, who ended up in the rocket after getting confused trying to find BHS. After a confrontation, Mr. Richards' brandy was poured over the control desk, leaving the rocket floating aimlessly into space. Kind of like that David Bowie song, the Genie, I think. It was another morning, and Lieutenant Rogers had now grasped the hang of teaching. Today he was going to teach the Year 8s all about the atom bomb, when Major Rogers burst through the door and whispered into Lieutenant Rogers' ear.
I've got some bad news, kids. I'm afraid your teacher, Mr. Richards, I don't know how to put this, but basically he's lost in space.
A roar of cheers came from the Year 8s. Meanwhile, back on the spaceship, Alfonso was getting tired in the airlock.
Hey you, I'm being serious. You've got to let me out of here.
Mr. Richards was still sleeping off the brandy he'd consumed to get over the stress of the situation he'd found himself in.
I really need the toilet.
Mr. Richards began to stir, followed by Alfonso banging on the airlock.
I can't hold it any longer.
What are you on about?
I need the toilet.
There's a water bottle in there with you, isn't there?
No, I drank it.
Good. So you've an empty bottle you can relieve yourself in then.
Can't go to the toilet in that.
You're going to have to. I'm not letting you out. You're a liability to the mission.
Are you kidding me? There is no mission. We're lost in space.
Mr. Richards carried on looking at his navigational map.
If we carry on at this rate, we'll land on Jupiter in another 7 months.
I can't hold it for that long.
Alfonso slowly crept back into the airlock, out of sight of Mr. Richards, and carefully opened the cover to the ventilation shaft. He began to make his way up the shaft. Halfway up, it got narrower, and he once again became wedged.
Help! Oh no! I'm stuck! Ah!
Mr. Richards continued to check his map and paid no attention to Alfonso.
Help! I'm bloody stuck in here!
This wasn't the first time in the journey that Alfonso had tried to trick Mr. Richards into opening the airlock door, so he continued to ignore him.
Please, you've got to help me! I'm stuck!
Mr. Richards pulled out a magnifying glass and began to study the map further, still ignoring Alfonso's cry for help. The temperature in the command module began to increase, probably due to the fact that the vent in question was for the aircon. However, Mr. Richards had suffered many a hangover, and a rising temperature was one of the symptoms, so he ignored it and carried on reading his map. Just then, a warning light flashed on the dashboard that read, "Urine found in the aircon system."
I'm sorry, I couldn't hold it any longer.
Mr. Richards put down the map and made his way over to the door of the airlock. He looked through the window to see Alfonso's legs sticking out of the vent.
What are you doing in there?
Trying to get out. Now help me.
In the manual, it states that the only way to get urine out of the aircon system is to clear out the vents, into the airlock, and considering Alfonso was now blocking that vent, it was not an option. Mr. Richards studied the manual in more depth before coming up with a solution, as only a great science teacher would.
I've got a plan.
What is it?
If I open the airlock, the pressure created by the vacuum will suck you and the urine straight out of the vent. I'll then close the airlock again before you leave the spaceship.
I don't like the sound of that.
It'll be fine. Trust me. I'm a high school science teacher. You can text me any questions to 555-1001. Start your text with Hoover, followed by your question.
Why, Hoover?
Something the writers came up with in another episode.
I can't reach my phone though,
Just take my word for it.
Mr. Richards began a countdown from 3, 2,
1.
He pushed the airlock open button on the dashboard. The door opened behind Alfonso, and a loud whooshing filled the spaceship. In a matter of seconds, Alfonso was sucked out of the vent. Before Mr. Richards could close the door again, Alfonso was sucked out into space.
What have you done?
It was at this point that Alfonso Eldorado, who had been stuck in the air vent of the British Department of SPAC, became lost in space. Now, I know he had already been lost in space, but now he had become completely lost in space. A relieved Mr. Richards closed the airlock door and went back to reading his map, knowing he no longer had to put up with Alfonso's moaning. Back in the British Department of Space, Major Rogers had just received a message.
Lieutenant Rogers, get in here now.
Lieutenant Rogers stopped making his coffee and burst back through the door again.
What is it? A warning signal has come back from Mr. Richards. What's the warning?
There's urine in the aircon system.
What is he doing up there?
Weeing in the air vents by the sounds of it.
We installed a perfectly good toilet in there, didn't we?
Yes, the one from Grandma's downstairs bathroom.
Get on the radio to him. We need to sort this thing out.
Major Rogers grabbed the microphone.
Ground control to Major Richards. Do you know there's a perfectly good toilet on the spaceship?
They sat in silence, watching the computer expectantly, before finally, over the radio, came...
It wasn't me. It was this other guy.
What? It was just you in the spaceship?
No, some Mexican guy snuck on.
So, the Mexicans have sent a spy, have they?
Are you sure he wasn't Chinese?
Shut up, Major Rogers. I'm in command now. Are you sure he wasn't Chinese, Mr. Richards?
No, he was definitely a Mexican.
Why would the Mexicans be spying on us?
Good point. I want you to interrogate him, Mr. Richards. Find out what he knows and why he's there.
He said he was supposed to be meeting someone at BHS.
It makes sense. It's not the first time that's happened.
To be fair, it is an easy mistake to make. As you probably know, I once spent 7 hours lost in a shopping mall in Vermont.
Put him on the radio, Mr. Richards.
I can't. He's gone out the airlock.
That was quick. Brilliant work, Mr. Richards. He won't be relaying any information back to Mexico now. How far off from Mars are you?
I don't know. The control module has had brandy poured over it and it's malfunctioned.
How did that happen?
The Mexican knocked it over during the struggle.
Filthy Mexicans. So the whole spaceship is out of action?
Correct.
That explains why the toilet might not be working.
No, the toilet works fine. It was the Mexicans sabotaging the spaceship.
Cadeto, get me back down to Earth.
It was an appropriate question to ask. I mean, would you like to be lost in space? However, Lieutenant Rogers was more interested in getting himself knighted and owning his own Saturday night talk show.
Your priority is to finish this mission, Mr. Richards.
But all the controls are down.
You leave that to us.
Major Rogers logged back onto Twitter and began to tweet the Chinese Space Agency.
Be careful what you ask them, Major Rogers. We don't want to look like idiots in front of them. Do you remember last year's Space Agency Summer Ball, where we forgot to bring our dates?
The Russian guy didn't bring a date.
That was his date.
Whoa, really? Anyway, I put spaceship controls not working. Laugh out loud. Do you guys know how to fix it?
I like the LOL. It shows we're not taking it too seriously.
They've replied.
What have they said?
How have you jokers done that? It's simple. Reroute all the power through the backup generator for the airlock system. A quick repatching of the circuits in the control panel, and then shut down the system before doing a manual reboot.
That's definitely over 140 characters long. How are they doing that?
Oh dear. Bad news, Lieutenant Rogers.
What? We don't have a backup generator?
No. They've retweeted us.
That's well out of order.
We've had a tweet from the Russian Space Agency now, as well.
Don't open it.
Despite his brother's command, Major Rogers opened the tweet.
It just says, "Ha ha," repeated over and over again.
Bloody Russians.
Had we best get the details to Mr. Richards?
Just a minute. Reply to the Russians' tweet first.
With what?
Anything. I don't know. Something along the lines of, at least my girlfriend doesn't have upper lip hair and fat arms.
Thanks to Mr. Richards' great understanding of circuit boards, he'd got the control panel back in order and began following the directions to Mars that the British Department of Space had given him. Mr. Richards strapped himself back in his seat, put his helmet back on, and began his descent towards Mars. The voice came over the radio.
Good luck, Mr. Richards. There's a lot of national pride riding on this, and we've had a major diplomatic incident with the Russians.
The spaceship began to fall apart as it hit the planet's atmosphere, crashing into the ground. Mr. Richards emerged out of the wreckage, where he was greeted by an old man who was stood in front of him, surrounded by his children. Well, I think they were his children. They certainly had a family resemblance.
Welcome to my planet, traveler.
Welcome to our planet.
It couldn't be. Could it? Is this Alfonso? I wouldn't put it past him to repopulate a whole planet. Find out in the next podcast.